Thank you very much, first of all, to the organizer for inviting me to this forum. It is the first time that I'm participating in it, and I'm quite happy for that. And I'm also very happy because I've met many interesting people and have had wonderful interventions during the day that I have participated in it. I would like to be as brief as possible. I will discuss this new target, this new objective. It wasn't something that came out of the blue. It was a quite anticipated target after we had the revision of the 2030 target to 25%. We are expecting to see the 2050 target on net zero emissions. And I think that everybody wondered whether this was feasible, if this was an attainable objective, or if it was borderline at least feasible, given the time that it's going to take to pull through an adaptation that could turn violent. We're only talking about a horizon of 29 years. And we need to comprehend that agriculture is not just an emitter of emissions, but also a contributor of the outcome. So if we look at the net emissions, we also have a minus, a negative performance with respect to storage. First of all, why did we set this target for 2050? And if we asked randomly some people, most people, more than half of them would answer, no, it's impossible to achieve. So why raise a target that sounds improbable? When we set an objective, the first thing that we achieve is that we start considering it. We start building a vision of what the future will be in 2050. And based on that image, on that vision, we start building the foundation, the basis of data, of remarks, observations, an evidence base that will allow us to consider this future and realize this vision if we manage to do so. The second thing is, it's going to help us visualize what the industry, the sector will look like if it no longer emits, or if it has net zero emissions. It will have altered drastically. So what will it look like? Will it be an Aldous Huxley agriculture, or is it going to be an agriculture that's similar to the current one, slightly differentiated as regards emissions? And what kind of role would such an agriculture play in this world? The last thing that allows us, that helps us set a target, is what is needed to achieve this transition. This transition from emissions nowadays to 55%, and from 55% to a net zero emission outcome. Yes, therefore, it does make sense to set objectives, even if we know that it's going to be very difficult to achieve them, or that it's going to be very arduous work that's going to be needed. In order to make it happen, the EU Commission has looked at different scenarios. One of the most prevalent today is about 4 different pathways that could lead us to net zero emissions by 2050, looking at what agriculture will look like at the time and what we need to do. So scenario number 1 speaks of focusing on improving efficiency of production as regards emissions. I'm not talking about financial productivity. I'm talking about production efficiency emissions-wise. Second scenario, we need to look at the consumption angle. So how can we consume products that have a lower emission footprint, a lower carbon footprint. And in order to be more clear, how can we move away from livestock and breeding products, cattle breeding products that are quite arduous, quite impactful on the environment, to another model. Scenario number 3, more or less the same, but it also looks at land which is freed up because it's used mainly as pasture. And the 4th scenario is precisely the same as scenario number 3, but here freed up land is used as a forest, which is an important receptor and storage unit of carbon dioxide. So with this chart, you see how we can move from the year 2010, our baseline, all the way up to 2050. In order to achieve net zero standards, we will need to have 81% reduction in emissions compared to 2010, which means a completely brand new production process and a new consumption process. And if there's one thing we know, it's that it's very difficult to change the production procedures, but it's even more difficult to convince consumers to adapt to new standards moving them far away from what they're used to. Once again, how the 4th scenario, which is the one that brings us closer to net zero, the net zero target, can be looked at if broken down into the main sectors: livestock, managed soils, agriculture, and changes in the soil carbon stock, which has to do with land use changes and forestry. So we've already mentioned more or less, and we're running out of time, what it takes. It takes 3 things. First of all, we need to adapt production as regards emissions and make it more productive with respect to the production value to released ton ratio. This is the new productivity measure. On behalf of consumption, we need to lead consumers towards products with a lower carbon footprint and carbon dioxide footprint. And number 3, we need to try to recover as many emissions as possible, because we cannot have production without emissions. We cannot have life without emissions. We try to recover as many of those emissions as possible by freeing up land, for example, to use in forestry or grasslands, pastures, and activities that are great binders of carbon dioxide and at the same time storage units for carbon dioxide. This is what I had to tell you. I hope that we're within time limits. Thank you very much for your attention, but also thank you for the invitation, for providing me with the opportunity to participate and take the floor at this very interesting panel. Thank you.